Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look into how northern Minnesota has played a role in researching mysterious neutrino particles. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to share more with us about the Northland's role in studying these ghost-like particles is reporter Jimmy Lovren. Jimmy, welcome back.
Thank you, Wyatt. It's good to be here.
Yeah, now going from a weather-based story to a more science-y-based story. So for those who are interested in the sciences, this is the episode for you. And if science isn't necessarily your cup of tea, well, hopefully we'll learn something new from this episode.
Yeah, hopefully I can relay this. It's only a little complicated, but we'll do our best here.
Yeah, it helps that neither of us are scientists ourselves. Right. So for you to put together a story at all, you kind of have to it's kind of like not quite to this extent, but in The Office, Michael Scott, okay, explain to me like I'm 5.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, now explain to me like I'm 4.
Yeah, there's a lot of information that I just don't need to get into because it's for a general audience. And as long as I can kind of scrape the surface and give a broad understanding, hopefully that's enough. But if you want to go down a rabbit hole and learn more, there's plenty out there. But yeah,
maybe this could be a jumping block for you to look more into it yourselves.
Exactly, yeah.
Before we get into it, as usual, I'd like to ask, what prompted you to look into this?
Yeah, so I've kind of been vaguely aware of neutrino. I guess I didn't know it was necessarily neutrino research, but I was aware of this research happening about a half mile underground at the Sudan Underground Mine, Lake Vermilion, Sudan Underground Mine State Park. The U of M used to have a lab down there, and I knew that they did something with, rays and particles and stuff like that because, they used the ground as, a filter to filter out, what was, cosmic rays that are always coming from space, and the rock kind of helps filter it out. And so whatever reaches their sensor just helps eliminate what they don't want or, so I was aware of that used to happen. I've been on the tour, like the mining tour there. There's also a science tour. I didn't do that. But so I was aware of that being there. I didn't know until recently that basically the lab, they built a new one above ground, but up by Voyageurs National Park at the Ash River Lab. And they're doing a very similar thing with a better sensor, mostly above ground. And yeah, I had no idea that was happening. And then kind of kicked into high gear when went out on the UMD's Blue Heron vessel. It's their research ship. Mm-hmm.
Which has been mentioned on a previous episode, yes. But for a giant fishing lure that was once on it, not necessarily the ship itself, but it was part of the story.
Exactly, yeah. And so they're we'll get into this later, but they're setting up some equipment just to kind of test the water column in an area off two harbors ahead of deploying some sensors possibly next summer that would be looking for neutrinos, the particles we'll talk about here as well. So I didn't, that's kind of a new peg, and I originally was gonna do a story just about that, but I think to back up and explain to readers all of this research and where it began and how it's ongoing and where it's going to go is kind of how the form that the story took with the mention of the Lake Superior work, but more broadly just about all of the neutrino research here.
Mm-hmm. And just to plug previous coverage of ours, holistically at the News Tribune, just about a year ago, Jay, myself, and Clint had gone down to the Sudan Underground Mine. So if that interests you, we do have a story on that. Not the science aspect of it, but if you want to just take a visual journey down there, we do have a story for that. We can link that in the episode description. And then you also had a story on the Blue Heron from your travels on there.
Yeah,
just to plug that a little bit, we can have that link.
Cuts to NOAA, so more federal funding cut kind of thing. That's what we used some visuals in an interview we got out there for that. But yes, if you're curious about the things we're talking about here, there will be photos and links and everything on our website.
Now, before we get too thick into the weeds here of this story, let's start off with what should be the obvious question. What is a neutrino?
Yes.
For those who don't know. Not me, I obviously know.
Right. Yeah, we all know. It's just common around here. No. Yeah. What it is it's a type of particle that really is minuscule. Like they didn't even know it had mass until 1998. And it's like they don't exactly know how much mass there is, but it's like a millionth of an electron, perhaps, is what a researcher from UMD told me. And anyway, it can move through anything without hitting anything. So they can go through bodies we wouldn't know, the walls, ground. Good demonstration of this is the sensors here in northern Minnesota pick them up from a beam that is shot from an accelerator near Chicago. And it's aimed here at Minnesota, and it goes 450, 500 miles through the earth, 6 miles underground at the deepest point, and still reaches here. So like you can shoot these particles through the earth and they will move through as if nothing is there, nearly at the speed of light. So they're also like, they're so common, but so light that you combine them all, they probably weigh more than, what the UMD researcher said was anything that you can see, like all the planets, anything you look up at the sky, see the stars, planet, everything like that. You combine all those. I mean, that's probably how many, if you combine all the neutrinos into one, the mass, could be more than that. So they make up a significant part of this, not just world, but galaxy and beyond. And so just having a basic understanding is what they're after. I mean, they're just doing fundamental research on the state, kind of like what form it took almost, or how it changes from Chicago to Minnesota, and how the different quote flavors, behave and change. And so that's what they're after, is just the basic understanding. Again, it hasn't even been 30 years that they, were able to determine that there was mass on these at all, any mass with these at all. So that's what a neutrino is. And I should note, the beam is harmless. Again, these particles, if they by chance were to, I guess, pass through you from this beam in particular, you wouldn't know. And again, that's a long shot, and it's going underground, and you're fine. Your cosmic rays, there's like 2 going through your head every second anyway, like just naturally, not from this beam, but just from space.
I imagine you're able to get a faster answer to that question than when you were looking into Black Beach and whether or not the taconite tailings there were
exactly
harmful.
Right.
That was at least
easier to understand than this, but I'm getting my head around this kind of. At least you could touch and feel those taconite tailings. This you just kind of have to imagine. I mean, but this equipment does visualize it, right? They and we can get into that and how they're able to see that these actually exist.
And where and when specifically did the research begin? I know you talked about it's been around 30 years, but take us back to the beginning.
Yep. So the roots here in Minnesota began in kind of the early 1980s when Marvin Marshak, physics professor at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, started to use the old Sudan underground mine for some research studying whether protons are stable or fall apart. It's never been observed whether or not protons decay, but that's what he was after. And again, the half mile of earth and rock does a really good job of filtering out those cosmic rays that are going through our bodies and everything all the time. And so when a sensor is down that far, they're most, it becomes more rare for things to reach it, and a lot easier to filter out the noise, all the other stuff that comes from space. You couldn't find, proof of protons decaying. That's not what he observed, but what he did observe are the naturally occurring neutrinos. So then comes, 2003, they build a new sensor out of steel that is designed to then be shot 2 years later in 2005, shot with this beam from Chicago that is aimed right at Sudan mine. And every 1.2 seconds, which send out trillions of neutrinos, and then they would capture, a few of those, right? And right now, the sensor up in Ash River gets 1 or 2 a week. So anyway, that Sudan mine project wasn't long after that got up and running. They're kind of always planning the next lab. And so pretty soon after that, work began on the Ash River facility, which is a bigger, better, it's a different sensor. I guess I can't compare the size off the top of my head, but it's like 50 feet by 50 feet by 200 feet long. So I think it probably is bigger. It's different. The other one was steel. This one is basically filled with baby oil, mineral oil, and a little bit of chemical that when a particle moves through it, it will give out some light. And then there's sensors that can pick up the light, and then they can kind of see, where exactly these sensors are, or where exactly these interactions are happening. And it isn't underground, and so they are just barraged by these cosmic rays. And when you see on their computer screen, what a second or far less than a second is picking up, it's like, sprinkles, like an ice cream of rays. But then they're able to kind of pick that exact time that they know when the neutrinos are coming from Chicago would arrive. It takes less than 3 milliseconds, I guess, to travel 500 miles through the Earth for these particles. And they're able to kind of filter out all the noise and just look at that one tiny fraction of a second that they know it would arrive. And, sometimes once or twice a week, it will be there. So, yeah, by 2016, the Sudan mine research projects stopped. There was also a dark matter project ongoing there. Those both wound down. That and the neutrino sensor wound down in 2016, but Ash River has been going, since I think it received its first 2013, 2014 is when it started to come online. So that has been running. However, right now, the beam in Chicago is not working. So it is a transformer failed about a year ago, and they think it's going to take about another year to get repaired. And since then, they've just had the sensor running for the naturally occurring neutrinos, and also they can pick up. They're looking for supernovas. They can pick up other the cosmic rays that are constantly coming. So it's not all useless despite the beam not operating at the time. However, they're hoping for one last go before they retire Ash River.
Mm-hmm. And so what's kind of like the future look like for the research moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, it come 2027, the beam won't be aimed here towards Minnesota, and the Ash River facility will begin to kind of be decommissioned. So again, they're always planning kind of the next facility. And so even when Ash River was coming online, attention, was already being made on what's called Dune, and it's in an old gold mine in South Dakota, and that they're building a bigger and better, well, again, size, I don't know. They're building, a better sensor with, newer technology, because that advances quickly in this old gold mine in South Dakota, and then they will reposition the accelerator, the beam positioned to this mine and shoot it towards that. So yeah, Minnesota's role will begin to kind of end on that, although researchers will still be involved. Alec Habig, the physics professor from UMD, is the director of the Ash River facility, and he's involved in the Dune project. And so he said it's sad that the Ash River's winding down, but everyone's known it's coming, and that's just kind of part of the game, he said. So, but it's a huge facility, and while after it goes down early 2027, it will be used to kind of assemble some of the things that are going into the gold mine in South Dakota. But first, they have to get this beam running again, because they want another 6 months of data if they can get it out from about a year from now or next summer through the end of 2026. They would really like to have that beam going again so they can get some data from artificial or these neutrinos that come out of the beam. As part of that, they are going to try to pick up neutrinos, detect neutrinos in Lake Superior. So and this is kind of what they were preparing for on the Blue Heron voyage we went on, is they're going to put these glass sensors into about 200 meters or 650 feet of water that kind of along that beam, and hope that they can detect one of the artificial ones. This work and the sensors that they're going to be using would be borrowed from an experiment that did this in the Mediterranean Sea, which picked up naturally occurring neutrinos in water. But this would be the first time that they'd be detecting these artificial or man-made neutrinos from a large body of water. So they're going to give that a go next summer, if all things go according to plan. And so that'll be, if the beam is up and running again, if they can get all this to work, or they'll give that a try. And they've tried that once before at an old mine near Hoyt Lakes, an old mine pit full of water, and they didn't have any luck. But they're going to try again here in Lake Superior. So more of a proof of concept than they're not going to be able to get years of data out of this, but for a few months they hope to have that deployed in the lake, and kind of a proof of concept thing. So and then come end of 2026, this will wind down. But it's had for 20 years, the beam has been, when it's running, it's been aimed here at Minnesota, and then that'll come to an end, and things will move to South Dakota. So that's kind of where things are at now. But maybe one last go here. Yeah. Kind of one other interesting thing is that the beam, you think of it, if you're thinking of it as a straight line perfectly, all 500 miles don't. It's more like a shotgun, pellets and how they spread a little bit. So this spreads some. And so if you look at a map, the beam goes straight through Sudan and up, straight line, Chicago, Sudan, and then you look at a cross section of the Earth, which is round. It goes, across, kind of takes the tangent. Doesn't follow the Earth's curvature. It cuts across underground. Anyway, but Ash River is not on a perfect line with Sudan. It's just a little bit off that line, and that was by design because they want to look for the particles that all take kind of that left turn, I guess. So it catches only those. It catches fewer neutrinos or detects fewer neutrinos. But I guess it's the ones that they're after. And they're trying to, again, determine or observe changes from Chicago to Ash River and how what they call flavors of neutrino change. So that's what they're after here. And again, and the Lake Superior sensor is I guess I don't know how far off or that exact perfect line they are, but they've got a little margin there that they can, they're not going to drop it 5 feet off the line or something like that and never get a neutrino. I mean, they've got some room to work because again, it's not a straight line. It's more of a shotgun shell blast.
Mm-hmm. Who's funding all of this?
Yeah, well, a lot of federal funding. So it's the Fermi Lab is the lab in Chicago, and that's a Department of Energy facility, and it's huge, and their accelerator is like half a mile curved under the earth in this middle of suburban Chicago. Looking at it from the air is kind of interesting. But anyway, they so it's Department of Energy, and the Ash River Lab was actually it's like over 200 million, and a good chunk of that, if not all, was out of like the stimulus bill of the Great Recession. So 2008, I suppose 2009 or so, somewhere around there, a lot of people out of work, a lot of building not happening. And they were able to get this into that bill to kind of, again, stimulate the economy, get things going. And so it was built using funds from that. And then like the lab space at the bottom of Sudan, it will need a new tenant. Once it's shut down and once equipment's removed and once it's used to create equipment for the South Dakota facility, it will need to find a new tenant. It's a big space, so who knows? But so it's Department of Energy funding, and then there are lots of other research projects associated with it. But it's kind of a lot of professors from all sorts of different institutions. University of Minnesota is obviously very involved in it, and University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, and Duluth. But I spoke to a physics professor who works at William and Mary, the University in Virginia. And there are people from all sorts of physics departments everywhere that collaborate on this and have access to the data and are able to participate in different ways. So, yeah.
Any concerns with funding up in the air if it is federal, or do they feel pretty secure?
To be determined.
To be determined. Okay.
Yes.
We'll leave it at that for now, unless more found out about it. I was just curious.
Yeah.
And so I guess, the ultimate question that comes from the story talking about this is, why does it matter?
Yeah.
Or why should the average person care about these neutrinos and how they're being studied?
Well, it's basic research, right? It's basic on just fundamental understanding how these things work. And again, they make up so much of the universe. And that's kind of where, in that basic understanding is we're still figuring it out. That could lead to, information that we don't even know, or uses that we don't even know of today. But just being able to understand these teeny tiny particles that when you add them all up, represent a whole lot of matter. Anyway, it just is a lot of mass when you add everything up, and understanding how it works can help, with things maybe we can't imagine today, but in the future, more research, better technology could really, I guess, lead to some pretty interesting things. One such example that I guess people have ideas of at the William and Mary professor told me about was, nuclear reactors give out neutrinos, and they just they can't control them, can't contain them. So the thought is maybe you could put a detector on like the border of a enemy state or something, that someone who's trying to build a nuclear reactor or a nuclear weapon, right? And you can maybe get some information on that by monitoring the neutrinos coming from their country or something. And so there are thoughts like that right now. But again, I think this is just It's kind of basic understanding research right now. It's not applied research yet. And that can, I think, sometimes be tough for people who aren't in there to understand the significance of that. But there are a lot of discoveries that have been made built upon pieces that on their own look like maybe silly research or some. And I'm not calling this silly, but you know what I mean. Like there can be some research into some microbiology aspect of, I don't know, something else, and all of a sudden someone 20 years later is able to put that into use in their own research, and suddenly, this amazing discovery is made. And so all these little pieces of research add up over time and into something in maybe a lay person's mind is noteworthy, but it sure takes a lot of like simple science and basic understanding first to get there.
Mm-hmm. I like how, I think it was in your article, they're trying to find the puzzle pieces.
Right.
For then future generation to have a puzzle to put together with said pieces. But they can't put together a puzzle if there is no pieces to put said puzzle together. Exactly. Which implies you don't know what it's going to make when you put the pieces together.
Yeah. So what Habig told me, and I'll share, you've got it mostly right, and I'll share the quote exactly. He said, "If you don't figure out what even pieces of the puzzle there are, then your grandkids who are trying to assemble the better mousetrap don't even have the pieces to work with." And he described fundamental research as helping, quote, "figure out the shape of everything so that sooner or later somebody smarter than us with more information can do something we never thought of." So,
there you go.
Yeah, neutrinos I can't get my head quite around them, but the significance that could come down the road from this research and various steps could be pretty significant. So again, just kind of basic understanding of how the world works, even if it's a little hard for us lay people to wrap our head around.
And the Northland gets to play a part in that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's played a pretty big role. And yeah, so hopefully people aren't going to panic now about a beam being shot from Chicago at us.
Nothing's happened yet, folks. It's been a while.
Yeah. We've all been fine. We can't even notice it.
All right, Jimmy, I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks again so much for joining. And for the listeners, I think it's worth mentioning that, Jimmy, this is your last regular appearing presence on the podcast. You're taking a step back to focus more on your other projects. You're still at the Duluth News Tribune, to be clear. You're still,
still here.
Still going to see a lot of writing out from Jimmy. He's just very much focused.
Yeah, more. I'm covering the environment in the 8th Congressional District and odds and ends, and so focusing on that. And who knows, maybe something will come across that I return. But for the most part, won't be a regular visitor to this podcast or contributor to Northlandia. Yeah,
never say never. We've had a couple ideas that, who knows, they could pop up again, and then we can make them work for a one-time appearance.
Right.
But your regular appearance here will be greatly missed. Interesting way to end it with as sciencey as we could get on this podcast.
Exactly. And hopefully I didn't mess it up too bad.
No, not at all. But before we wrap it up here, I'm just curious, since this is your last one, is there any particular stories that you've gone to work on or experiences that have stood out to you? And then 2.5 years you've been on the Northlandia team?
I've done a couple stories about the border that I still get a kick out of, the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin, particularly the areas of what we think of Duluth, little slivers that are actually part of Wisconsin and Superior, Wisconsin. It's like the end of the Spirit Lake Marina and the end of a rail yard in West Duluth along the harbor there.
That's your very first podcast episode, I believe.
I think you're
episode
right.
4 of the podcast, I believe.
Yeah. And so that I still get a kick out of when I pass those areas or think about it. And I think that kind of embodies Northlandia, just kind of weird quirks. It's got a history component. And it was kind of fun to report. So that comes to mind. I'm sure there are others that I am not thinking of at the moment. But I think of that one the most, I think.
Yeah, I think your most popular one was probably the Stone Fortress one.
Oh, yeah. And I haven't looked if that's sold yet. But yeah, there was the bunker house, the Stone Fortress house for sale over in South Range, Wisconsin. And I sometimes think of that and look it up and see if it's still listed. I don't know if it's sold yet. We'll see.
Yeah. That's when you'll come back. You'll come back
exactly when I buy it.
If you know something, listeners, reach out to Jimmy and we'll bring him back.
We're trying to figure out who's gonna buy it. If someone's bought it and you know them, let me know.
All right, Jimmy. Well, thanks so much for joining, and we hope to see you sometime in the future.
Thank you. I bet I'll see you, but
I'll see you.
Yeah.
But on the podcast specifically.
That too. Yeah.
Thanks, Jimmy. And thank you for joining us in this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topic/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path in the rush to return, here in Northlandia.